Welcome everyone to Monday Match Analysis. Today's episode is a conversation with Hall of Fame tennis writer Steve Flink in our traditional post-major chat, which we have been doing for multiple years now. And it's a pleasure to bring you the 2022 Roland Garros edition, where we really focus in on Nadal's title run and work backwards, mostly from the quarterfinal with Djokovic getting to the Zverev semi and the Ruud Final. And just kind of zooming in on what this means, a couple of other topics such as draws, and if perhaps we should rethink how draws are done in tennis. Good stuff. Think you'll enjoy it. Steve is the author of two great books, The Greatest Tennis Matches of All Time, which I have over my left shoulder right now, and Pete Sampras, Greatness Revisited. So definitely check those out if you want to read some great tennis books. Without further ado, here's Steve Flink. We're joined once again by Steve Flink for our traditional post-major chat, which has been a multiple-year routine that Steve and I always really enjoy. I know you guys, the viewers, always enjoy. And this year, we're getting into Roland Garros 2022. Steve, thanks again for being on. It's always a pleasure.
Gill, great to be back. Looking forward to talking about that French, which there's a lot to talk about, and I look forward. Why don't you get us started? All
right, so let's start in the quarterfinal. I know that's different. You know, it's not what we want. If we're being completely honest, you sent me an email when we were talking before the tournament, and you saw how lopsided the draw was, and it really did play out that way. So, you know, you got to look at, and with all credit to Zverev and how that semifinal was going, you got to look at the quarterfinal as a pivotal moment for Nadal as he comes through that match, beats Novak for the 8th time in Paris, and ends up winning his 22nd major and his 14th title at the French Open. What do you feel like was the biggest difference between the 2021 Nadal Djokovic match and the 2022 edition?
Yeah, the funny thing is, I see it largely, Gill. I don't know how. I'll be very interested to get your thoughts, as that was almost a reversal of psyches this time. That I watched Djokovic last year, and in the critical stages of that match, after he'd come back from losing the first to win the second, and it went to the critical third set tiebreak. And it was one of the great sets they've ever played, that he was really enjoying himself. There were times he was smiling, and there was a positive energy to him. Rafa was fretting a bit, although he was still typically Rafa, obstinate and hardened competitor, tough as can be, but a little bit down on himself. But Djokovic greatly enjoying himself, relishing the battle. This time, I thought the reversal was that Djokovic seemed kind of negative, irked by the crowd. He's used to crowds being against him, particularly when he plays Federer and Nadal. So it surprised me a bit that he wasn't sort of better prepared to accept that this time and say, you know what, that's a given. I'll deal with it. He seemed definitely more put off than usual in my mind by that. Then when it came, so that's the psychological analysis. Now for the tennis analysis, I felt like it was a strange match in the sense that Djokovic, I felt, played the first and third sets, very subpar sets for him, and Rafa was terrific, and Rafa was utilizing that forehand down the line about as effectively as he ever has against Novak, and all credit to him. He was the aggressor often in those first and third sets, and he deserved them, but there was an odd sort of I don't know, reticence in Djokovic. You would have thought, I was surprised, for instance, that having lost the first set to Nadal in the 2020 final when Rafa routed him, when Djokovic seemed a bit weary from a 5-set semi with Tsitsipas, and then again losing the first set last year. In both years, he went down 5-love. Last year, he worked his way back a little and made it a 6-3 set. But I thought this time he surely would come out of the blocks firing hard and making sure to at least stay with Rafa in the first set. And sure enough, long first game, he had a couple of chances to hold, didn't take them. and Rafa breaks him, and he was off and running. And Novak did have one chance to break back for 2-all, and it looked like he might break him in that fourth game. It didn't happen at 15-40, and and then it just sort of unraveled from there. Rafa was razor sharp and purposeful and moved his server around. He did all the right things, but I thought Djokovic, the second half of the first set, didn't play well, and it carried over into the second set, Gill, with going down 2 breaks. So here's Rafa's won 9 out of 11 games, and he is roaring at this stage. And I thought Djokovic did a terrific job to win that second set. To Nadal's credit, although Djokovic took 6 of those last 7 games, Gill, to win the set, Rafa didn't make it easy. There were 2 games combined in the middle of the set that took almost half an hour. Yeah. So that told you how hard he was still battling, which surprisingly, you didn't get that same sense when Djokovic was getting behind in the other sets. He made the great comeback in the second, but in the first and third, as I said, I didn't think he played well at all. And what surprised me was the number of times, Gill, that Rafa was able to get Novak on his heels when Novak was serving. That didn't make a lot of sense to me. Part of it was Nadal's returns were exceptionally deep, and he then was able to often take control of points. But this was happening even some of the time when Djokovic was getting first serves in. So I thought he should have been more of the aggressor on his own serve, unable to do so. And I also was surprised, Gill, that Novak, having come back to win the second, which was such an obvious shot in the arm to him, such a boost to come out of this danger of being down 2 sets to being 1 set all. It's like a brand new match, that he started off the third set so passively, really surprised me. And Rafa sensed it. Rafa sensed it in Novak. And then, of course, the last piece in the puzzle, Gill, was the fourth set, because Djokovic got the early break. There was a disputed call from Rafa on the sideline that he didn't win the argument with the umpire. The replay showed conclusively that his angled short backhand cross court was indeed wide, and Novak had the early break, maintained it, served quite well in the fourth. Some of his best serving was in the fourth, and he kept holding all the way up, got the 5-2 lead and served for that set at 5-3 and had the 2 set points. And that to me was a little bit symbolic of the match, that Rafa not willing to give anything away there, not going to surrender, and Novak tight, because on the first set point, he hit a backhand cross court. He was only going for an angle. He wasn't really even trying to hit it hard for a winner. He just wanted to open up the court a bit, and he netted it. And then on the second one, Nadal's return was really short. Then Novak made a pretty good second shot. Another short ball from Rafa. Novak comes in on the back end down the line, nowhere near the sideline, nowhere near enough depth. Rafa could have gone anywhere he wanted to go, and he wisely went behind him down the line for a winner, and eventually got the break back, and eventually won in the tiebreak, which was another interesting sequence, because Nadal, Gill, in the tiebreak, in my view, he was very sure of himself, and he played those first 2-3 points brilliantly. And then Novak kind of gave away a few points. The next thing you know, he's down 6-1, and Djokovic, in typical fashion, got kind of loosened up, as he'll often do when he's way down or down match points. He saved 3, but it was too late, and Rafa closes it out 7-4. So I thought it was a thoroughly deserved victory by Nadal, another masterful clay court performance. I thought we should have at least had 5 sets, and who's to say that Djokovic could have maintained the ascendancy, because he didn't do it after the second set. So I'm not certain that he would have won the 5th either. Just think we might have seen the best tennis of the match simultaneously. What about you? I had a feeling if we could have gotten the 5th, that then maybe both players would have really taken it up a notch, and we could have had a spectacular battle. But it was not to be, because Djokovic did not close it out when he had the chance.
Well, Steve, that's a lot of excellent points in that great summation. As far as the 5th set goes, my feeling in the 4th was that Novak was having an exceptional performance on first serve, and that there was no way he could have sustained that. So even throughout the 4th set, I wasn't shocked when Nadal broke Novak's serve at 5-3, because I felt like the way Djokovic was playing in the second set, hanging in there with Nadal in the rallies, I thought that was long gone. And even in the 4th set that he, was ahead in, he still wasn't winning from neutral. So I, at that time, favored Rafa. I thought that he was just hitting through the court a lot better. with more high margin aggression. And I saw a lot of things that reminded me of 2020 in the slower fall conditions, this time in the nighttime conditions, where Nadal's power is, I think, a big advantage for him when the conditions get heavier, despite what a lot of people said coming into the match about the conditions favoring Novak.
Yes, and a lot of people, you're right, most notably Nadal himself. It emanated from his feeling that he wanted the day match. And I totally agree with you. And so does Ivan Isevich. Goran Ivanisevic, Novak's coach, made some interesting remarks about, first of all, and I agree with him on that too. He felt like there were many things to consider there. Like the nighttime conditions don't favor Novak on his serve. You talk about a lot of first serves. It's true, but he wasn't getting this as many free points as he would if they played that match at 3:30 in the afternoon. He would benefit from warmer conditions on his serve and in some other respects too. I think you're right. Oddly, although the difference this time, Gill, was that was a rout in 2020, and Novak was way out of sorts there. Novak played to a much higher standard this time, but some of the same problems and obstacles were there once more. I agree with you on that. I'm not sure how to feel about what would have happened in the fifth. I just don't think it would have been. Many people would have thought that Djokovic, having the momentum, would have played a great fifth, and I think he might have. But I agree that Rafa was more self-assured and confident in this match. The question to me is why Djokovic in 2020. I had the feeling that maybe the Tsitsipas 5-set semi had taken away some of his energy, that he really hadn't recovered as well as he needed to physically, and that therefore he was a little flat, and that was the primary reason we saw less than stellar performance from him. Just to expand on that point slightly, Gill, in the 2020 final, I think we had a Djokovic who was well below par and a top of the line Rafa who was blazing through that tournament in the fall. But that's the important thing about that tournament and that match is that it shows that for all of Rafa's misgivings about not playing in the day, and he feels he gets much greater purchase out of his forehand in the day because it bounds much higher and he's a lot happier in the heat, that he can play great under any clay court conditions. And that was an interesting debate, because in the end you could really say that the evening conditions didn't favor either player, and it certainly didn't help Novak on his serve. And as you pointed out so accurately, Rafa was hitting through the court. He was penetrating more as a rule than Novak was. Partly Novak's own fault. I think he needed to be more the aggressor, get on top of the points. But Rafa, let's face it, Gill, over the last 5-6 years, across his 30s, even before that, he doesn't play the same way that the Rafa who won his first French in 05 or even 06 or 07. He, to me, is much more aggressive and capable of flattening that forehand out some. Sure, there's still plenty of RPMs, but he hits it harder and more aggressively. It's a different purpose to it, and he can hit through the court more and not rely as much on the topspin. And that's what I think he feels he has to do against Djokovic. You probably heard him say afterwards, Gill, that he felt he had to bring his A game, that he had no choice. If he didn't bring his A game, he was going home. So I thought he played miles better. Granted, totally different type of opponent and not the same kind of big server than he had against Felix Auger-Aliassime. I mean, I think it was a decidedly better performance than the 5-setter he had in the previous round, and that was stepping up to the occasion. Conversely, Djokovic, who'd been, I thought, almost letter perfect in beating Diego Schwartzman 1-3-3 in the round of 16, that match and really most of what he did in Rome and what he played at the whole tournament at Roland Garros, I thought he was ready to play at a much higher level than he did against Rafa. That's what's so interesting about these big matches, is you don't know necessarily who's going to step up. But I did think Rafa played the match, to get back to your point. He played it more on his terms, and Novak never fully found a way to combat it. It might have, if he could have snuck through that 5-3 game and converted one of those set points, that would have been a lift. And then maybe in the fifth, he would have taken it up a notch, maybe. But Rafa was not going away either. So listen, in the end, a great victory for Nadal. And in the end, Gill, to get back to your original point, that to me was the final. because I think both players knew when they walked out there that already Zverev had beaten the kid being Carlos Alcaraz, and neither one of them really wanted to play the kid. They weren't afraid of him, but they were more fearful. Not to say that Zverev was not in sparkling form in this tournament, because in that match with Carlos especially, and then again at stages against Rafa, but in the end, you don't fear him on the big points as much as you do Carlos Alcaraz, who is he's just so unintimidated and so such a great, well, he'd shown it from Miami and then winning the 2 clay court tournaments as well, that how rapidly he's improving and how undaunted he is by competing against the best. He would have relished playing Novak or Rafa. So my feeling was they knew the result. They knew that Carlos Alcaraz was gone. They both thought that in the end, in best of 5, they were going to beat Zverev, and they felt their chances were excellent against anybody on the opposite half of the draw. That's why I say the final in many ways was that quarterfinal, which is why I'm glad you started with it.
Yeah. We'll get to the draw in a moment. I have a question to ask you about that. The other thing I want to respond on in terms of the quarterfinal is that the energy, because I felt that Nadal looked fresher in the 4th set. As I mentioned, Djokovic was winning, but it was short points, and Nadal would tend to win the longer exchanges. And I really felt like Rafa, especially down the stretch of the 4th set, had more legs. And I was thinking about why, and this is something I didn't even say after the match, so I want to say it now, and see what your thoughts are. I felt that the start by Nadal was the key to that, because he went up 3-love in the 2nd set after winning the 1st. Novak knew he couldn't go down 2 sets to love, and the energy expenditure to climb back in that 2nd set. You also mentioned the 2 games that took about 30 minutes combined. Was, it was such an effort to get back in that set that it probably emptied too much of the gas tank for Djokovic. And that's the only way I could explain a player who obviously has really strong endurance. And last year in the 4th set, it was completely reversed, where Nadal's legs were gone and Novak looked fresh. I felt it was the flow of the match where Nadal built such a great lead that it ended up getting to Djokovic's energy by the end.
Great analysis. I don't disagree with the word you said. I'd only want to add this, Gill, is that during that 2nd set, when he did wage the comeback, Novak was letting his shots fly. He was really ripping the ball off both sides. He had Rafa on his heels. That was the only prolonged, I think even more so than the 4th set, even more than the 4th, as he said to himself, I'm not going to beat him playing the way I played. I've got to hit out freely. I've got to hit winners. I've got to open up the court. And I really essentially have to blast Rafa off the court. And that was the only time that you saw some close-ups of Rafa on the screen, Gill. You probably noticed it too. Only time he looked remotely discouraged. There were looks on his face like, how can I stop this? What am I supposed to do about this? He was amazed by some of Novak's shot making. But you're right, it took a lot of energy, and it gets back to my earlier point to you that it also meant Novak had to fight his way through some really long deuce games there in the middle of the set that did consume that essentially half-hour span, so that it was not a typical 6-4 set. It was a lot harder work than that. And so, yes, he was a little bit depleted afterwards. I just thought it would be such a psychological lift that we would have seen him start the 3rd set better than he did, and with the same level of aggression. He backed off again. He started playing the way he did in the 1st set, and then Rafa just ramped it up the way he had in the 1st set and had it back on his playing to the tempo that he wanted. So just fascinating the way it swung there. But I think your comments are spot on.
So in a lot of other sports, like the NCAA tournament or the NHL playoffs, the 1 seed plays the 8 seed in hockey, for example. The 4 seed plays the 5 seed.
Yeah.
In March Madness, it's, the 1 seed plays the 16 seed and so on. This was a draw where people naturally started to think aloud and wonder if that would be a better system so that it's not just random, as 5 through 8 could be in any quarter with 1 through 4, and instead it is set. So do you think it should be like that, or do you think the way it is okay?
No, I'm gonna sound like I'm contradicting myself, but let me explain. I do believe 16 seeds would be better than 32. That's a whole separate argument. We could discuss that. There shouldn't be 1/4 of the players seated in the field. That's a separate argument. As far as your point regarding 5 through 8, why should the number 1 seed be saddled with number 5? And it doesn't make any sense to me that, you're not actually being rewarded for being the number 1 seed. And why should the player, Rafa, in this case, as the number 5 seed, above the 6, 7, and 8 seeds, get the worst deal from his end to have to play the top seed? No, I think your way is much better. It should be 1 versus 8, 2 versus 7, 3 versus 6, 4 versus 5. So I would much prefer that, because then I think the rewards are there for where you are in the seedings. But having said that, I would also add, Gill, that I think it was a terrible injustice. You had the player who at that point was a 13-time champion, who happened to have some struggles on the clay court circuit, only played 2 clay court tournaments. He'd had the injured rib in Indian Wells. We know all the reasons. Didn't get his usual preparation, didn't get his usual points. So he didn't stay in the top 4. I think that has to be taken into consideration when you seed. And I felt like there's no way you can't have him seated among the top 4. And then this could have been avoided, so that at least Djokovic and Nadal would not meet prior to the semifinals. A semifinal, okay. Quarterfinal, too soon. So I felt that was a real injustice, and that Djokovic paid a price, as well as Nadal, obviously, because he was the top seed and had the misfortune. But they shouldn't have had to collide in the quarterfinals, in my view. What are your thoughts on that?
For a little while, and I've been asked about that actually for a number of years, about the seedings. And for a while, I was concerned that if they did it that way, we would see the same quarterfinal matchups over and over again. Then I ran the kind of simulation, and I looked across multiple majors, and I actually went to see if the matchups would be repetitive. And the result was that they really would not be, that there was occasionally Roland Garros to Wimbledon, you would get repeat, but that it really wasn't too common. So more and more, I'm now coming around to I don't even know that we have a name for it. I guess symmetrical seeding of the top 8, right? Yeah. So I'm there. I would be happy with the change.
Yeah, I just thought that was a shame, because we knew we were going to lose one of them. Djokovic had been coming into very good form after a terrible clay court start to the clay court season in Monte Carlo, but he gotten better and better with the final in Serbia, and then the loss to Carlos Alcaraz in really one of the best clay court matches of the season, in a final set tiebreak in Madrid, and then he wins Rome. So he's really coming around. Rafa is Rafa and always rises to the occasion at Roland Garros. So somehow the notion that they would meet in the quarters, it left me really unsettled. And it was bad luck, because obviously it could have come out very differently, but I don't even think there should be a chance that it should happen. Unfortunately, it did, and we had the most eagerly awaited match in the tournament prior to the semifinals. So it made the rest of the way something of a letdown, although Zverev gave Rafa a surprisingly big fight under the roof, with Rafa sweating profusely.
Yeah.
And Rafa really needed to bail himself out, as you know, from 6-2 down in that tiebreak in the first set was critical. And then after that string of service breaks, when they had 8 out of 9 games of service breaks, you had Zverev serving for the second set at 5-3 and throws in 3 double faults, which was really unfortunate. And then, of course, it all ends with that awful injury for Zverev that forced him to retire, which was a shame. And that was another pivotal moment, Gill, don't you think? Because they've been out there for over 3 hours. So if Zverev happened to win this, I don't think he was going to win, by the way. I thought he really had to win the first set, in my view. And that even if he'd come back to take the second in a tiebreak, if they'd been able to play it, I think Rafa would have eventually won. We'll never know. But he certainly would have had to have been out there, Rafa, at least probably another hour. And if Zverev had taken the second set tiebreak, he could have been out there a couple more hours. And that could have taken a lot out of him, because of the heavy sweating and the perspiration, he would have been really depleted. We'll never know, but that was clearly a big break to get off the court in less than 2 sets and just over 3 hours when he was having a mighty struggle with an in-form Zverev.
Yeah, that was a case where I thought the conditions really hurt Rafa.
Right.
I mean, Zverev didn't seem too bothered by the humidity.
No, he didn't.
And Nadal, not only was the sweating an issue for him, which I've seen before. It's usually not a good sign. The last time I really saw it was against Shapovalov in Australia, where Rafa was far from his best. You could see, even though he usually sweats a lot, not that much. And his ball, unlike in the Novak match where his forehand was extremely damaging, in this match, he wasn't playing close to the lines, and was it was really Zverev on the offensive more often than not. Now, Zverev made plenty of mistakes. Rafa did not make a lot of mistakes, but there were points where it felt like Nadal was actually Zverev's passenger in the match. Now, with that being said, Nadal was in a perfectly okay position to win the match. Obviously, having won the first set with his best tennis of the match when he needed it. His forehand came alive at the end of the tie break. He hits the incredible passing shots, 2 of them, 1 to save set point, 1 upset point. So he's clutch, and Zverev isn't, and that decides the set. Including the second set when you mentioned Zverev's poor service game, serving it out. But if Zverev won the second set, I'm afraid, because of those excruciating conditions where the court speed, Steve, was as slow as I've ever seen. I thought the way the clay must have been so damp, and the ball so heavy. I mean, the ball just was not moving.
Yeah, and that's where you're right. But that's where Zverev is remarkable, because he's so strong, and his backhand is just plain sound. His backhand is terrific. And when he's controlling the forehand, which he did most of the time that day, he really was able to make the more penetrating shots. And he did have Rafa really backing up. I no doubt he handled the conditions much better. And he also looked surprisingly fit. He looked like he could have gone a lot longer himself, Sasha. So it would have been interesting. But I guess what I'm saying, Gill, is I don't want to come across as mean-spirited, because I have great regard for Zverev winning 2 year-end championships and all the Masters 1000s that he's taken, and just the gifts of his game. But I do not trust him in the crunch at these majors. And he almost let it get away against Alcaraz. He was destroying Carlos for 2 sets. And then he loses the serve at the end of the third. Okay, fair enough. Then he serves to the match in the fourth and tightens up again. And finally covered from set point down to win the tie. But if that match had gone 5, I don't think he would have won. I think that's where he worries me, is the psychological competitor is fragile, not the physical competitor, but the psychological one. And therefore, I wouldn't have trusted him, even with you making that good case for why he was doing so well. I still would have liked. That's why I think he had to have that first set, and it was a big blow. And I give him credit for not folding in the second, but I wouldn't. I still believe in the end, Rafa would have won. It's just a shame that when you get a semifinal of that importance, that we couldn't finish it off. On the other hand, it was probably the most poignant match of the tournament, Gil, to see him come back out on the court on the crutches, shake the umpire's hand, hug Rafa, who's right behind him. They both were so classy in the way they handled that situation. And it was particularly impressive from Zverev, who's heartbroken at that point.
Yeah, I agree. It was actually, even though the Djokovic Nadal match was the most important stage of the event, the most memorable was those very unconventional 3 hours, Steve, from the conditions to the way the match was being played. I think, both players, even if Zverev was handling the conditions, it still was, it still affected, I think, the tennis overall negatively for both players because of how slow it was, which we saw with Zverev not being able to hold his serve. the only, but zooming out, back to, okay, the result is the result. Zverev gets injured. I agree with you that physically it was a key that match ended, because the winner of that match, especially if Zverev won the second set, the winner of that match would have probably have gone through as physical a match as they have ever played in their careers. And it sounds like hyperbole, but it's because of the conditions that just made it so rigorous on the players.
That's not hyperbolic at all. It's accurate.
Yeah. I mean, 3 hours, 2 sets. It was just not a normal circumstance.
But I just wanted to add one thing to your analysis. You're so right that Rafa's forehand came true when it needed to. It was brilliant in the tiebreak. In turn, Zverev, he wasn't quite sure. I mean, okay, Rafa aces him on the first set point at 6-2. Nothing you can do about that. He went wide to his forehand, surprised him. But then Sasha tried that serve and volley. Rafa made a great forehand pass. Sasha tries a serve and volley and didn't miss the backhand volley. He was just a little uncertain. And I felt like that backhand volley that he missed long, he shouldn't have missed it. And those are openings you can't let get away from you. But obviously Rafa made it tough on him and also came up with those spectacular winners. And all power to him. He said it was something of a miracle, which was modest of Nadal, but it certainly was a spectacular comeback.
Yeah, you're right. You got to make those volleys. And I also go both ways on the approach shots, right? I mean, Nadal has great anticipation and hits perfect approach shots, but at a certain point, when you get 3 approach shots, you got to win one of the points, right? I mean, in terms of, again, Nadal's anticipation is great, but
you're saying Sasha's got to win one of those if he comes in like that.
Yeah, it's easy to give all the credit to Nadal for spectacular passing shots, right. But you also, when you get 3 short balls, it's at this level, and I know the conditions made it hard to finish. I think the fact that Nadal read you 3 times, knew where you were going, it can't be a coincidence.
No, exactly. And also Nadal, he's very adept at making you play awkward shots. I give him credit for that. But on one of those critical points there, he sort of just guided his backhand down the line to make Zverev move. And then Sasha ends up missing the high backhand volley cross court. That he's a big guy. He anticipated a little better. Rafa didn't try to do that much with the pass. He just tried to make him play a difficult volley. And Sasha should have been up to the task. No, that was a crushing blow. But I go 60-40, the credit to 60% credit to Nadal and 40% criticism to Zverev for losing that breaker.
Sure. From up 6-2. Let's go to the final. Were you disappointed in Ruud's performance? I couldn't really bring myself to be all that disappointed because I didn't think he was ready for that. And it wasn't his fault that the draw opened up for him. He's been incredibly consistent at beating players ranked lower than him. The final was uncompetitive and certainly anticlimactic, but I personally couldn't bring myself to be too critical of Casper.
No, I just would be mildly critical in the sense that he did the best he could and lost the first at 6-3, broke Rafa once, not a bad effort, hung in there, played pretty well. When he had an opening for a forehand down the line, he took it. Then he did have that 3-1 lead in the second set. And understandably, and Rafa, in typical Rafa ferocious fashion, gets the break right back. So he didn't let it get out of hand. But I wouldn't have expected 11 games in a row. I think Ruud could have done a little better than that, frankly. I think at a certain point, you can't let your respect and admiration for Rafa and all your practice sessions at the Nadal Academy and the fact that Rafa is such a revered sportsman and such a great guy get in your way to that extent. I would have hoped, I guess coming in, I thought we were looking more like 3-3-4, not 3-3 in love. So the disappointment was the third set semi-surrender. I'm not saying he did not tank by any means, but his attitude was, he was very resigned to the defeat by then. And I thought we should have seen a little better out of him in the third. And Rafa sensed it. He pounced. what can you do? There's another guy named Federer who had something similar happen to him in the 2008 final when he lost to Rafa 1-3 in love. It was even worse than this, but it was the same deal. The love set came at the end, and Rafa is capable of that. But that's my only criticism. I thought Ruud did very well for all the reasons you cited. It's his first final. They did a great job to get to the final, played a nice match against Cilic, had a nice win over Holger Rune. There were a lot of nice moments for him in this tournament. And I think Rafa's right. The future is bright for him, but I hope he'll learn from that and become an even grittier competitor. And I suspect he will.
With the longevity that Nadal, Djokovic, and Federer have all achieved, you have examples, and I think this, this one is more extreme than any of the other examples, where Rafa's dominance in Paris dates back to 2005. Ruud was 7 years old. I mean, you got to think that psychologically it plays a role that Ruud has spent his whole life admiring and even being a fan of Rafa. Watching him win these finals, never loses one, and now he's the guy on the other side.
Yeah, no,
I mean, there's nothing like that we've seen, right?
No, it's true. It's an unusual circumstances, but that's part of being a great professional, and that's part of what could take him into the top five. What might get him, say, a year-end top 5 position instead of top 10 is that attitude, that sense of, okay, the friendship ends. I mean, look at Rafa. He's ruthless on the court. He's a great guy. He's extremely likable. He's so humble and afterwards, and the remarks he made about Ruud. But when he's out there, there's no nonsense. There's absolutely no nonsense, and he's a killer on the court. And that's really what they need to learn from him. That's what a Ruud has to learn from him. Okay, we can laugh a little after the match, and we can show our respect for each other there, and our camaraderie, and just enjoy whatever friendship we've got. But while we're out there, the lines are drawn. And Rafa is exceedingly good at that.
Yeah. There's a little bit of killer instinct that Casper is developing, but I don't think it's there yet. And Nadal, Nadal on Sunday in French Open finals, I mean, it's almost a sure thing that he's going to bring his best.
Oh yeah, and particularly under those circumstances, I mean, he would have brought his best under any circumstances against any opponent, but he knew deep down, Gill, that it was going to take something. I mean, Ruud sort of gave it away before the match when he said, essentially he said he had to play his best match. He had to play better than he's ever played before. It's going to have to be the best match he's ever played. Well, when you're coming in thinking that that's what you need to do, as opposed to, I need to play really well, I need to be near the top of my game, that's a lot less pressure. But he was being realistic. He knew exactly what he was up against. And I sense that Nadal had very clear memories from the practice sessions, not of the scores, because he admitted later he didn't remember the scores of those sets the way that Ruud apparently does, but he knew the patterns, he knew how he played, and he felt in the end he was going to have a very bad day to lose that match. And that was not disrespectful, but it really was realistic. The matchup, I just think in the end, the matchup is not favorable for Ruud, and it's extremely comfortable for Rafa. The way he peppered away with his cross-court forehand, and used the heavy top much more than he did, say, against Novak or in his other matches, and then opened up the court for the inside-out forehand when he needed it. But often he broke down the backhand, and he never allowed Ruud to get too comfortable on his forehand wing, which is really Casper's best shot.
Absolutely. And, he had Casper backing up a lot on the backhand. When he needed a point, he could approach into his backhand. There were plenty of options for Nadal. I want to bounce off an opinion that I took away from big picture as we look at 2022, which resembles 2021 for Djokovic, obviously having won the first 2 majors in 21, and one of those was Nadal's best slam. Of course, Roland Garros, and Nadal now wins Australia, Novak's best slam, and then kind of holds serve at his best slam to win the year's first 2 majors, and he takes a two major lead in that race, 2020 now. It feels to me like Carlos Alcaraz is going to become a factor in the coming years in a way that Tsitsipas and Medvedev and Zverev, as good as they are, Carlos is different. He's at another level. And I think that makes 2022, while Alcaraz is still an inexperienced teenager, very, very important. I think the U.S. Wimbledon and the U.S. Open are even more important for Djokovic than we would have known after Australia, or the Australian Open that Nadal won. Even more important in hindsight than we would have known because of Carlos Alcaraz. What do you make of that read?
It's a very good read. And I think that in the back of their minds, both Nadal and Djokovic would agree with you. Rafa, if he's able to continue into next year, Novak inevitably will. Yeah, I mean, listen, I still don't put it past Carlos Alcaraz to win the US Open. I don't think he's going to be a tremendous factor at Wimbledon. He'll be in it. Don't get me wrong. I see him quarters and maybe he gets to the semis. He's going to do well at Wimbledon, I suspect. But the Open, I still give him a real shot. But you're right in terms of short term, and Novak trying to catch Rafa in the Grand Slam title race, where he's now 2 behind at 22-20. Yeah, these become very important events for him, and he's got his 6 Wimbledon titles. He's won it the last 3 times he's played it. You know, he won it in 18 and 19, and they didn't play Wimbledon in 20, and Novak got it again last year. So it's been a really great major for him. He needs it pretty badly. No doubt about it. And that's, and you're right, because Alcaraz, at the rate that he's improving, where I totally agree with it, and I wrote this in one of my articles a while back. I mean, I just think he's going to soar. All of those guys, all of the Medvedevs and the Tsitsipas's and Zverev, even Zverev, although I have great respect for Zverev's game, I think that Carlos is going to move past them quickly and convincingly. Not to the point where he just dispatches them with ease every time he plays them, but he's going to get the better of them. He is going to be very possibly be ranked number 1 in the world at the end of this year. Djokovic cannot defend his points at Wimbledon. So that means he didn't get any points, couldn't play Australia, lost 2,000 points there. He'll lose 2,000 at Wimbledon. Novak is going to have a heck of a time finishing the year number 1. I think it's very unlikely. Carlos is just going to pick up titles. And even if he doesn't win a major, he'll do well at the US Open for sure. He'll do well enough at Wimbledon, and I think he'll get some other titles. So by the end of the year, he may well have set himself up for an incredible 2023. Not that I'm suggesting that he'll take over the game, but I think that that's where we're going to see him winning at least 1 and probably 2 majors in 2023, whether or not he gets his first one this year at the US Open.
I'm with you on the timeline. I'm not, my expectations aren't too high for Wimbledon as far as him as a contender, but the US Open, we've seen how that has gone in recent years. It's generally been an opportunity for the younger players. It's been the major that the field has had the most success at, against Nadal and Djokovic in particular. And then, you know, the off season that Alcaraz had this year and how much stronger he got.
Right.
If he can do anything close to that again, in the training block that he'll get in December, then he will ascend to heights that are going to be a real factor in every tournament, I think, in 2023.
Yeah, Gill, absolutely. Just to go back for a second, let's just say that he converts the set point in the 4-set tiebreak against Sasha Zverev, wins it in 5, plays Nadal in the semifinals. I'm not at all sure that he wouldn't have won that match. I think it would have been a great match. And had he won it, I would have liked his chances immensely against Ruud as well. So it wasn't, you look back on that and realize he actually could have conceivably won this tournament, despite the early round scare against Ramos Vinolas, saving the match point. Just another example of his mettle and his capacity to compete under extreme pressure. And then he rounded into very good form in his next 2 matches and finally lost a tough one to Zverev. But no, I think, you know, he could, under the right circumstances, could have even won this one. So it's going to be fascinating to follow him. And if he surprises us with a great Wimbledon, then that's all power to him. That would really show us something, because he doesn't have much experience on the grass, and you wouldn't think it's the best court for him right now, even under the slower conditions that Wimbledon has been played in these last 10, 15 years. So but then once Wimbledon ends and he's out on the hard courts, I expect some big things from Carlos in a Cincinnati or Canada, and then to make a real run, serious run at the US Open title.
As far as Wimbledon goes, there is no concern for Novak. I think at the moment, based on what we've seen from him on the surface, he'll be the favorite, and it's the tournament that I feel like there's the most distance between him and everybody else at Wimbledon, where it's almost hard to conceivably come up with a number two, especially if Nadal can't play. Do you have any thoughts on Nadal's foot, other than what he's said, which is that it's going to be about, the pain. He's not going to do injections in his foot again for Wimbledon. He refuses to go that route. It's going to, it depends on the treatment, and we'll see what happens. And if he can play or not, with the Grand Slam, which feels, not like a particularly strong possibility, but certainly still in play. He heads into Wimbledon where Djokovic is going to be the favorite.
Yeah, if this plan of his works and he is able to compete, and that's a big if, but if he's feeling good and the foot is not a factor, he's not having to get, he as you said, he will not go through Wimbledon taking injections like he did in Paris. He's got to be ready to go without that. And let's just say that scenario plays out. Listen, he hasn't won the tournament since 2010, Gill, and when he won his second title over Thomas Berdych in the finals. And, then he lost to Djokovic in the finals the next year, had a string of bad Wimbledons for him, but then came back pretty strong in 18 and 19, lost to 10-8 in the fifth to Novak in the semis in 18, would have won that tournament for sure if he'd beaten Novak, because it was Kevin Anderson, a depleted Kevin Anderson in the final.
Yep.
Then he loses, didn't play a very good match against Roger in the semis the next year, but he had played really well coming into the semis. So he's had a number of impressive Wimbledons, just not up to the level we saw from him in the period of 2006 to 2011. So, but I would think he would be almost loose, strangely. I don't think he'd let himself be hindered by, oh my God, I'm going for the Grand Slam. If I can win this, I'll be where Novak was. He will not get carried away with that stuff. I think he'll only be looking at it in terms of, this is a chance for me to win Wimbledon. I haven't won it since 2010. Maybe I can do it again. And he would love to sort of get himself in a position to play Novak again, where the pressure would be entirely on Djokovic. But all things being equal, Nadal there or not, a healthy Nadal there or not, we're probably not going to have Zverev. I'd be surprised if he's ready to come back from his injury. Medvedev, another big server who could be dangerous on the grass, will not be there. So I think that makes Novak an even more clear favorite. The question is he normally he's good with those types of conditions. He can handle being the favorite. Right now, he's feeling a little extra pressure, I think, because it looked like he was ready to pull away. He almost wins the Grand Slam a year ago, and he loses to Medvedev in the finals of the US Open, one match short. And we all know about what happened in Australia. And then he has this disappointment against Nadal in Paris. So he has not won a major since Wimbledon last year. So, might make him a bit anxious. On the other hand, I think he's going to be extremely eager to come through there. And he is really comfortable on those courts. So he has to be the clear favorite.
Yeah, and certainly he was feeling a lot of stress as a heavy favorite last year in a similar circumstance. The only difference was the pressure was coming from, the momentum that he had built over the course of the season instead of the lack thereof. But I agree with you. I think that's a good point about how he'll be feeling, about how important it is. He is in good position to attempt to handle that. So I think we've covered everything here as far as the men. Let me mention bring Iga Swiatek into the conversation before we wrap things up. 35 wins in a row, and somehow it's at no point has it felt all too surprising given how much better she is than seemingly everyone else at the moment. What has impressed me more than anything is the psychological side. She does not appear to be bothered by the weight of pressure and expectation on her?
No, I mean, there was one moment in the middle of the tournament, she dropped a set, she looked anxious for about 7 or 8 minutes.
I agree. That was it.
Then she turns the corner and wins the second set and never looks back. No, I think it's very impressive. Makes me a little sad that Barty decided to go. I would have wished we could have had a nice rivalry brewing with them right now. And I wish Osaka would get back into the mix. But I think your assessment of Iga is really excellent. And it isn't surprising, but what a compliment that is to her, that we go out, we anticipate every match of hers, and we'd be surprised if she didn't find this level right now. So I want to see if there's any sign of instability on the grass. I don't suspect there will be. I think she can handle the lower bounces. I think her game is well equipped to handle any kind of court right now. She's built up a lot of psychological capital, and she believes she's the best in the world, and clearly is. So if she doesn't win at least one of these next two, I'll be shocked. I mean, it may be asking a lot of her to sweep through Wimbledon and the Open, but surely she's going to win at least one and go deep into the other. And, she's what the women's game needed in many ways. As I say, I regret the lack of a rivalry and Barty being gone and Osaka, not the same Osaka yet, but she's a dominant number one. I've been waiting for this for a long time. I think that there hasn't been enough continuity, and that she's going to bring that a new level of interest to women's tennis with her domination, because there still will be other players in the mix, but people now are focusing very sharply on her, and deservedly so.
I agree, Steve. And the rivals will come. That might take time. I know right now it's very unclear who can be ready to challenge her. I mean, you could throw out 10, 15 names, and
right.
That's how unclear it is. But
Gill,
let's give it some time.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Just a quick point. The nicest part of this story is think back to 2 years ago when you mentioned Rafa when they played the fall edition of the tournament after the US Open, and Rafa romped. And that's when Iga got her first major. And then she didn't have a great 2021. But it's wonderful to see her now hitting her stride and playing this kind of tennis, and having Barty step aside and then moving into that number one position so comfortably, embracing it and expecting it of herself, and becoming a great champion. And I had been disappointed with the way she played a year ago, but I'm really thrilled to see her right now, playing the best tennis of her career. And we know she can. There are facets of her game she can improve. She will get even a little better than this. So I think she'll be ready to deal with that competition when it comes. But it'll be fun when we have 2 or 3 of them maybe who demonstrate that they can be authentic rivals to Iga and give us some great semis and finals at the majors.
I was just getting ready to just say bye and promote your last book, Pete Sampras' Greatness Revisited. So Pete won one, right? He won the first, the US Open. He was very young. Then he took a second, right? He took a little while to just get back into being done. Is it a similar pattern you saw with just Iga's rise?
I think you could say that. That's very true. He won the 90 Open. He was 19. It was shocking to a lot of people. He was seeded 12th, the youngest male champion ever. And he went through at Lendl in a 5-set quarter, and McEnroe in a 4-set semi, and Agassi in a straight set final. It was a spectacular breakthrough moment for him. And then the next 2 years were tough. And 2 years later, he was back in the finals of the US Open and lost to Edberg. And that match sort of changed his life permanently. But yes, 93, he was ready to embrace it. That can definitely happen. You're right. There are some parallels, and it happens with great players. And in Iga's case, I think she probably will never look back now. I think she's so comfortable wearing the robe of a champion, and I don't think she's going to take it off for quite a while.
Yeah, agreed. Easy to forget that she is still just 21 years old. So there's a lot of time for her to be at the top of the sport. Steve, always enjoy this. This was really fun, as always, and we don't have to wait very long to catch up again, either before Wimbledon or after. So
I look forward to it, Gill. Thanks for having me on.